Hi, welcome back. My name is George, the Solent Boat Butler, and this is Refit and Sail. This is the first of a two-part discussion about batteries on boats, what may be the appropriate battery type for your particular needs, how you may want to charge them to get the most out of those batteries, and also some other related topics. If you're new to the subject, then this is the video for you. Now, this is a massive and moderately technical subject. I'm planning to keep the video relatively simple and hopefully give you enough information to make an informed choice on what batteries you may want to buy for your boat. The information I give is based on the products that are available right now. So if you're watching this in 5 years' time, then, well, I'll be amazed if this video is still up in 5 years, but it might be. But the information may be out of date. New products are coming along all the time, but the basics hopefully are correct. Certainly at the time of filming it. Now, it's also going to be based on my experience, both as a cruising and as a racing sailor, also someone who's effectively lived off grid on my own cruising boat for 12 months when I went away cruising a short while ago, but it's also based on my knowledge as someone that designs and installs electrical systems on my customers' boats. Before we get into it, these are purely my opinions, and as we all know, opinions are a bit like bumholes. Everyone's got one, and there is another analogy that I'm not going to go into, but use your head and you'll work it out. There are probably an awful lot of other people on YouTube and definitely down your local sailing club or yacht club that will evangelize about a particular type of battery or a particular charging system that they've installed on their boat. And in their view, if you don't have it, you're an idiot, because they've obviously chosen the best and they've done all the research. Now, no one size fits all when it comes to batteries, when it comes to charging systems. And like I said earlier, everyone's welcome to their opinion. If you have an opinion, you think I've got something wrong or I've missed a point, then please do put a little comment down in the comments. I do read them all, and I may choose to ignore those that are abusive. Right, let's make a start. The first and most important thing that I want to get across to you today is that a battery is just a bucket of energy. It only contains so much energy. When you use it up, it's gone. It needs refilling. Now, one of the most common things that I see on internet forums, Facebook and what have you, and various groups, is that people will say, oh, my batteries don't last long enough in between charges, or my batteries don't last long enough before I have to replace them. They get trashed really, really quickly. And people will come in and chip in and say, oh, you need to buy this battery, or you need to buy that battery, or you need to buy some super duper battery. But the reality is that if you don't balance your charging system, if you keep taking energy out of a battery and don't put energy back into that battery, it's always going to go flat. It doesn't matter whether you buy the best battery in the world. You've got to have a balanced charging system. It is just a bucket of energy. Some buckets are bigger, some buckets are smaller, some buckets are more efficient, but essentially there is only so much power you can cram into a battery, and if you keep pulling out more than you put in, guess what's going to happen? It will die. One of the most important pieces of equipment that you really want as part of your electrical install is a good, accurate battery monitor. Ideally, one that has a shunt as part of that, because it can then very accurately measure the amps going in and the amps coming out of your battery bank. Now, I personally have a Victron 712 installed on my cruising boat, and I would highly recommend it. It's a really, really good piece of kit. You can also connect it to your phone via Bluetooth and do stuff. I'm not sponsored by Victron. I know there's a Victron doodad back there, but it's just a good piece of kit, and I would recommend them, and I've installed lots of them on my customers' boats. On a previous boat, when I didn't have perhaps the interest that I have now in electrical systems, I bought a NASA battery monitor, a BM1 or a BM2, I think it was. It's okay, it does do the job, but it's not a patch on the Victron system. The key thing is with a battery monitor is that you can see what is happening to your battery in real time. And without having that knowledge of what's actually happening with your battery, what's coming in, what's going out, you're really working from a position of complete guesswork when it comes to managing your battery system. So if you do nothing else, if you don't change any of your batteries, I would recommend you go and buy yourself a proper battery monitor. Not one that looks like this. Insert picture here, because these are rubbish. Well, they're not rubbish. They can give an indication of battery state, but they are very, very, very easily misinterpreted if you don't understand how they work. So give these rubbish things a miss and maybe buy something decent. Now, some batteries offer greater capacity than others due to their physical size. Some offer greater capacity due to their chemistry and what they're made from. So let's talk about the most common battery types that you will come across, and certainly the ones that I come across on a regular basis and recommend to my customers. Now, I'm not going to cover what I term as exotics in terms of the batteries. So you get things like carbon foam batteries and unobtainium and unicorn tier batteries. I'm afraid I don't come across them very often. So I'm sure if you're interested in unicorn tier batteries, you can Google that, YouTube it, whatever, and someone will tell you all about them. I'm covering the mainstream battery types. That's lead acid batteries, flooded lead acid, AGMs. I'm going to be talking about lithiums, but yeah, some of the other fancy stuff, that's for someone else to talk about. So let's start talking about those main battery types. Now, the first and the most common battery type you're going to come across is the simple flooded lead acid battery. I often call these FLA for short, flooded lead acid. These have been around for years and years. They're simple, they are inexpensive, and there's a lot to be said for using them. When they come to their end of life, you can literally recycle them, go and buy a new one down the chandlery, and away you go. With FLAs, there are some which are designed more for engine starting. These normally have a CCA rating on them, that's cold cranking amps. And in simple terms, the higher the CCA number, the longer the battery will be able to spin over your engine at the speed which will allow it to start. At the opposite end of the FLA spectrum are deep cycle batteries. Now these have much thicker plates in them. They've been used in golf buggies, motorhomes and cruising yachts for many years and have proven to be pretty reliable and effective as a power source. Good quality, true deep cycle batteries are reasonably expensive. So generally, chandleries don't always keep them. They are generally open at the top. That means you can take the caps off each of the individual cells and top them up with distilled water, so you can top up the electrolyte if you need to. The majority of chandlers will not stock good quality deep cycle, genuine, true deep cycle batteries, but you might find that they order them in for you. So don't believe necessarily the label that is printed on the battery in the chandlery. If it's relatively inexpensive, it is not a true thick plate, genuine deep cycle lead acid battery. The last is the most common type of FLA battery that you will find. These are generally called leisure batteries. Sometimes they're also called semi-traction batteries. They are often sold as sealed, meaning that you cannot open up the top of them. You cannot top them up like genuine deep cycle batteries. You're not expected to be able to do that. They tend to overfill slightly those batteries with electrolytes so that they can afford to lose a little bit in its lifespan, but eventually when they die, you cannot top them up. You'll generally see these in the chandlery for say £90 for a 85 amp hour battery, or £130 for a 110-ish amp hour battery. So they're relatively inexpensive. Now these are a bit of a hybrid between the starter battery and the genuine deep cycle battery. They sometimes have a CCA rating on them. You can use them for starting engines, but they're generally designed to be used as house bank batteries. However, whatever it says on the label of your battery, your leisure battery, these are not genuine deep cycle batteries. At that price point, you just can't get them because, you know, lead costs money. Guess what? It's expensive stuff. So if you deep discharge your leisure batteries, you will damage them. You will start losing capacity out of them fairly quickly. So you really are limited a little bit in terms of how far you can discharge them before you really start affecting their long-term lifespan. So how much can and should you discharge your batteries if you don't want to kill them? Discharging and recharging is called cycling, and you're going to hear that term a lot. I apologize. Now, we need to talk about that in terms of the context of deep cycling or shallow cycling. Now, deep discharging shortens the lifespan of your battery far more than shallow cycling. A leisure battery that is only discharged to 80%, so 20% used, regularly and then recharged will last many times longer than exactly the same battery that is discharged very occasionally down to 20% full and then fully recharged, because that's a really big deep cycle. If you do that, if you discharge your lead acid batteries down to 80%, you will kill them very rapidly. Whereas if you only discharge your lead acid battery down to 80%, so you're using only 20% of it, the very top part, then that battery will last a very, very long time. Next, I want to make the distinction between capacity and usable capacity, because those are two very, very different things. Now, when you go and buy your battery in the chandlery or wherever, it will have an ampere capacity stamped on it. Let's say it's 100 amperes, for example. But if you can only discharge that battery down to, say, 65% without causing damage to that battery, then actually your usable capacity of that big, heavy 100 ampere battery is only 35 amperes. If you buy two of them, guess what? You've got 70 amperes of usable capacity, but it's a long way short of the ampere capacity of the battery as a whole. Now, on a boat, 70 amperes is not a massive amount of capacity, but keep watching and we'll come on to some more realistic numbers. On a starter battery with very thin plates, you can get an awful lot of cold cranking amps, but not necessarily have a large ampere capacity. That's why you can start large engines with those really small lithium power packs. In fact, I keep one in my van when my battery goes flat. Here's an example of an AGM starter battery. So this thing is designed to start engine. It has lots and lots of very thin plates in it. It's relatively small, it's relatively light, and it has a huge number of cold cranking amps, but it has a relatively small ampere capacity. Now, if you regularly discharge your starter battery with those thin plates to say 25 to 30% of its ampere capacity, you will potentially be shortening its life fairly quickly. It's not really designed for cycling in any way, shape or form. Now, if it's a dedicated starter battery, it really shouldn't never be discharged more than say 5 or 10% because it takes very, very few amperes to start an engine. It requires a lot of cold cranking amps, but only for a very, very short period of time. So that's why starter batteries have a CCA rating and they don't normally have an ampere rating. So to be clear, starter batteries are designed for starting engines and really shouldn't be used for your house loads where you want a big bucket of energy that you can discharge to a reasonable level and then charge back up again without damaging the battery long term. In deep cycle lead acid batteries, the lead plates and the other components that are inside the battery are much, much thicker and much more heavy duty, and they are designed for the deep cycling I've mentioned. You can discharge them much, much further without damaging the battery plates or the internals, and they will last much, much longer with that cycling continuously. Rolls, who are one of the better battery manufacturers. I'm not sponsored by them, but I do have one of their batteries behind me there. They will themselves say that you can cycle their batteries. They're designed to be cycled down to 50% regularly and still give a reasonable length of life or service life. So if you have a 200 ampere bank of Rolls batteries and you can discharge them down to 50%, that gives you 100 amperes of usable capacity in your domestic bank. Now we move on to the ubiquitous leisure batteries and their usable capacity. Now this catch-all term has a range of qualities from what I suspect are little more than starter batteries, maybe with a few kind of minor tweaks in them, and the manufacturer will just stick a different label on it, right up to slightly more expensive and better quality, properly designed for the job leisure batteries. I'm not going to name any names, but if it's a battery that is competing on price in your chandlery or in your local retailer, then it is probably at the lower end of the quality scale. I do recommend going for a brand name, which is probably going to cost you slightly more, but frankly, you are probably going to end up with a slightly better battery as a result. Some of the manufacturers of leisure batteries will claim that you can cycle them down to 50%. Do not believe them, because you can't. You will destroy them fairly rapidly if you do that on a regular basis. If you discharge your leisure batteries down to 50%, I suspect you will not get much more than 100, maybe 150. If you're really, really lucky, maybe 200 cycles out of them. But frankly, that is fairly unlikely. You will lose capacity out of them very, very quickly. As someone that likes to use my boat quite a lot, that doesn't feel like an acceptable number of cycles to me before you have to start thinking about replacing your batteries. So what I would personally say that is, if you want your leisure batteries to last, try not to discharge your leisure batteries more than down to, say, 60 to 65%, which will give you 35 to 40% usable capacity out of your leisure batteries. So a leisure battery does give you much more usable capacity than a starter battery, for example, but it does not give you as much usable capacity if you want longevity than a true deep cycle lead acid battery. After FLA batteries, the most common type of battery that I come across and that I recommend to my customers is the AGM. That stands for absorbed glass mat. This is still a lead acid battery, but the acid is not a spillable liquid. So it's a little bit like a gel battery, but AGMs are far, far more common these days. Just like an FLA, you get some AGMs that are designed purely for engine starting, like this one just behind me here, but you also get some which are much more designed as deep cycle cycling batteries for your house bank, much like the Rolls battery that is here. The main benefit of the AGM over a flooded lead acid battery is that it will not spill acid, but also that they can generally be cycled, so they can be discharged and recharged far more than you can do with a flooded lead acid battery. How much more is dependent on the battery manufacturer and the quality of the battery that you've bought, but generally speaking, I would say they will last easily twice as long as a flooded lead acid battery. Commonly, they will last 3 times longer than a flooded lead acid battery in terms of the number of cycles that you can get out of it. Now, that's not to say that they aren't without their downsides. They are more expensive than flooded lead acid batteries, so they probably cost 2 to 3 times more. So you can do the cost benefit analysis on that if you want to, in terms of the replacement cycle for them. The other downside for AGMs is that they do have a slightly stricter charging profile, so they are susceptible to damage if you overcharge them. Undercharging them doesn't seem to matter quite so much with them, although it's always best to check the battery manufacturer's specifications and to check that your battery charger and your alternator are giving out the correct voltages to charge them as efficiently and correctly as possible. So on your shore power charger, most shore power chargers will have an AGM setting if it's reasonably modern, and it's highly unlikely that an alternator, a standard alternator, will overcharge an AGM and damage it. But if you have a external regulator for your alternator, you need to again make sure that the settings on that external regulator are set for an AGM battery and not any other type. The safe usable capacity for an AGM battery is thought to be about 50% of its overall capacity without damaging anything. So that's about the same as a genuine deep cycle thick plate flooded lead acid battery, and certainly quite a bit more than the bog standard leisure battery that you'll buy in the chandlery. Before I get on to lithium batteries, let me know what you think about this video. It's a bit of a departure from my normal boat fixing and boat sailing videos. I appreciate I've got a bunch of notes and I keep looking down to it, and I'm trying not to look down to it when I'm talking to the camera because I know it's really off-putting for you, the viewer, but there's quite a lot of detail in this that I want to get over. But let me know what you think. Is this sort of content of interest to you? Give me a like, maybe hit the subscribe button if this is the sort of thing that interests you. And if you want to, you can go down into the description where there is a link where you can go and buy me a beer. And for those of you that have bought me beers in the past, that money goes towards, well, beers, but also hopefully buying a new camera and better mics and better lighting and what have you. So if you fancy buying me a beer, you can do that now using the link in the description. The last type of battery is the one that many people will be waiting for me to talk about, and that is the lithium battery. I'm talking about lithiums because frankly they are pretty mainstream now. More and more people are using them on their boats. There have been, and there still are, quite a few people around that get a bit jumpy about the thought of having lithium batteries on their boats because of the perceived risk of fire. All I can say is that a little bit of education goes quite a long way, and some of those fears, once you understand the different chemistries that are available from lithium batteries, start to go away. Now, there are a number of different chemistries or different ways that you can make a lithium battery, and each will have its own pros and cons, and they all have different energy densities, and that's the key thing that battery manufacturers and the users of those lithium batteries are looking at. Now, for example, a phone and a laptop or a car manufacturer is looking for a highly dense or energy dense lithium battery because they want to make their products as small as possible. No one wants to go back to having a big Nokia brick in their back pocket because they like their iPhones or their Samsungs or whatever. They want nice slim phones with energy dense batteries which aren't too heavy in weight. Now, on a sailing yacht or on a motorhome, the energy density of that battery is less of an issue, but actually safety and stability is of a much greater importance. The most common lithium chemistry used on boats and motorhomes is lithium iron phosphate. That's LiFePO4 if you're a chemist. And this is the safest of the lithium chemistries available. It is very good in terms of thermal stability, and it has really good performance under most conditions. There are also some people that get concerned about the environmental cost of mining lithium batteries, and that does hold some weight with me. I've not looked into the full environmental impact, but I do understand that it is considerably greater than it would be for creating the equivalent lead acid battery in terms of ampere capacity. But that's not to say that lead acid batteries don't have an environmental impact as well when they are made. And of course, the other thing to factor in is that if a lithium battery lasts 5, 10, or maybe even 20 times as long as a lead acid battery, then is that one-time manufacturing cost to the environment greater or lesser than the production of all of those lead acid batteries to achieve the same end goal? Now, someone would need to do that calculation, and they would probably need to be an awful lot brighter than me to work out how to do that calculation. But I'm just giving this as a rounded view of whether the environmental cost of taking those lithium batteries is better or worse than taking a more traditional battery route. I suppose the other thing with lithium batteries is all those people that complain about the environmental cost of lithium all seem to have lithium batteried mobile phones, laptops, and potentially battery power cars, which are all lithium as well. So arguably, why not use it on your boat as well? The biggest drawback to lithium is unfortunately cost. Not only the cost of purchasing the lithium battery, but also the cost of making changes to your boat's existing electrical systems so that it can work with those new lithium batteries. You'll almost certainly need to make some changes to the engine alternator charging system, and it's likely or possible you may also need to change the shore power charging system as well to one that is compatible with lithium batteries. Another drawback of lithium batteries is that they do not like cold temperatures. They do not like being cold, and they will have an inbuilt temperature sensor into the battery management system, which is part of the battery, that will stop them from being charged if the temperature is below 0 degrees C or around 0 degrees C, because that will damage the cells inside that battery. Now, if you're going to be taking your batteries, or you're going to be taking your boat off to a very cold climate, maybe you're sailing to the North Pole, that would be a fun, exciting trip, then you might need to look at lithium batteries which have inbuilt heating. They are available now, but of course there is a cost to doing that in terms of the physical cost of the battery, but also when it's running that heating element inside the battery, it's going to be using power out of the battery. So then that's more power generation that you've got to make to then keep recharging those batteries and keep them topped up. However, the other side of that is that lead acid batteries don't work as effectively at very cool temperatures as lithium batteries do. So, you know, on balance, which is better, I don't know. I'm not going to tell you the answers to that. You've got to make your own mind up. On the positive side, lithium batteries are much lighter in weight than lead acid batteries, because guess what? They don't contain lead, but they can also, and more importantly, be safely discharged down to 10 or 20% state of charge, or maybe even down to dead flat 0% state of charge without damaging the internals of that battery. Lithium batteries can deliver a huge number of cycles. Most of them are related for at least 2,000 cycles down to 20% state of charge, and still have a good usable capacity after that 2,000 cycles. So if you discharge them, say, down to 50%, like you would a deep cycle lead acid battery or an AGM battery, who knows, maybe they're capable of 5,000 cycles, 8,000 cycles. The truth is, we don't actually know yet, because people haven't had these batteries long enough to put that number of cycles on them, but I'm certainly not aware of anyone who's put lithium batteries on their boat yet that has worn them out effectively. So they do offer a huge advantage over more traditional batteries in terms of their ability to cycle. Lithium batteries have a very low internal resistance, which means you can charge them and discharge them very, very quickly, which is another benefit. But it also means that the charging efficiency, if you have solar power or wind power, is much, much greater because you're not having to overcome the internal resistance that you have in lead acid batteries. So the charging efficiency of lithium batteries is much, much greater than any other battery type. So let's look at those three battery types quickly and put them in context with each other. You can buy a flooded lead acid battery with 100 amp hours, but if I'm being generous, 40 amp hours of that will be usable and about 200 discharge and recharge cycles at that 40 amp hours. Or you can buy yourself a 100 amp hour AGM battery, which has 50 amp hours of usable capacity and around 600 cycles at that depth of discharge. Or you can buy yourself a 100 amp hour lithium battery and you will have, well, about 100 amp hours, somewhere between 80 and 100 amp hours of usable capacity and at least 2,000 cycles at that level of discharge. Each obviously has its own price point, and what is appropriate for you is down to your use case. One factor in choosing the type of battery you may want on your boat is whether you go offshore racing, as one of the requirements from ISAF, that's the international sailing body that sets rules and regs for offshore racing. They say that you cannot have batteries that have electrolyte in them. It doesn't matter if you have leisure batteries and it says sealed on them. Those sealed flooded lead acid batteries will have a vent and they can leak battery acid if they are inverted. So basically, if you are going offshore racing, you need a type of battery that cannot leak acid. That means you've got to have AGM or gel or lithium or some other type that cannot spill acid. You definitely can't have flooded batteries if you go offshore racing. Now, from what you've heard me say over the last few minutes of talking, you probably think I'm a massive fanboy for lithium batteries, but actually that's not strictly the case. Yes, I do have a 300 amp hour lithium bank on my cruising boat. I bought it very specifically for a cruise that we had planned because we wanted to live off grid for a long period. However, that doesn't mean that lithium is the right answer for everyone. It may be AGM, it may be flooded lead acid. So let's talk about that a little bit more. If, for example, you use your boat for weekend coastal cruising and you go away maybe 8 weekends a year, and frankly, that's more than most of the boats seem to move in my marina, that's only 16 annual cycles of your house bank, assuming you discharge and recharge them every day. Now, in that use case, you could easily get 6, 8, or maybe more years out of a set of flooded lead acid batteries. So, you know, that's actually not a bad deal given that they are relatively cheap and relatively easy to replace. If you sail more regularly, or maybe you do some longer distance sailing, be that days or weeks at anchor, away on holiday, or days and weeks actually on passage, then it's likely that the cost and the hassle of replacing FLA batteries regularly mean that looking at AGMs may be the way to go, because you can cycle them so much more before they will reach the end of their usable life. Alternatively, if you plan to keep your boat for many years, it may actually become financially viable to have lithium batteries over AGMs, because in the long run they are going to cost the same or less amount of money, but you get the benefit of having those lithiums over a longer period of time. If you're planning to live off-grid, pretty much as I did for a year when I went off cruising, or you sail regularly offshore, or the limitations of the physical space on board your boat mean that you can't get the required capacity that you want using traditional batteries, then lithium is definitely worth considering. Keeping in mind that a lithium bank is going to be considerably lighter in weight than lead acid batteries, it's easy to see why so many offshore racing boats all go to lithium over other battery types. Let's have a quick look at the pros and cons of each battery type. So, flooded lead acid batteries, they are cheap to buy, they are easily sourced, and they are easily replaced when they come to their end of life. On the downside, they have a fairly short lifespan, particularly if you try and deep discharge them. They tend to suffer from sulfation. They can spill acid. Even a sealed battery can potentially seal acid out of its vent. Sealed variants cannot have their electrolyte topped up. Relatively limited or small usable capacity, unfortunately, with FLAs, and they are not allowed under ISAF offshore racing regulations. Looking at AGMs now, the pros are that they cannot spill acid. They are completely spill proof. They are pretty expensive compared to FLAs, but they also last an awful lot longer. So I'm going to say they are pretty good value. 50% usable capacity generally, but your mileage may vary, so do check your manufacturer's specification. They have a much longer life in terms of number of cycles, and they have a slightly lower internal resistance, which also leads on to faster charging. They are also often physically more durable batteries than flooded lead acid batteries, which is why they've been used on aeroplanes, and they were actually originally designed, I think, for use on aeroplanes. On the downside, they are more complicated to make, so they are more expensive to buy. They are often slightly heavier than FLA equivalents, and they have a stricter charging profile. They can be damaged if you overcharge them, or they're charged at too high a voltage. So you need to make sure, if you've got AGMs, that you have set your charging profiles correctly, both on your mains charger, and also if you have an external regulator for your alternator, just double check that it's on the AGM setting. Now on the lithiums, well, they have a greater usable capacity. Somewhere between 80 and 100% of the capacity of that battery is usable. They also have a much longer life because they can manage a huge number of cycles. They are lighter in weight. Very fast discharging and charging is possible, and they are also much more efficient when being charged from renewables like solar and wind. On the downside, they are very expensive to buy. They are potentially expensive to install because you are highly likely to need some changes to both the engine and the shore power charging systems on your boat, and arguably maybe there is an environmental impact for having lithium batteries. At the risk of boring you, I am going to repeat what I said at the start of this video. A battery is just a bucket of energy. What you take out needs to go back in if you're to have a balanced battery system, and knowing what's going on with your battery system using a good quality battery monitor is absolutely key. An energy audit is a really good idea. It's a good thing to do on your boat because it can tell you how many amp hours you need to run your boat for 24 hours, whether that is at sea or at anchor, and then you can work out potentially how long you can last on your existing battery setup, or it might tell you what sort of battery setup, how big a bank you need to make your boat sustainable over a set period of time. That's a whistle-stop tour of the most common battery types that I see in the boats that I work on, and the most common battery types that I also recommend to my customers depending on their use case. If you have enjoyed this video, you may want to see part 2, which is going to be a follow-up video about how to charge different battery types as efficiently as possible, whether that's on shore power, whether that is via the alternator on the engine, or whether that's via renewables. I'll again do a whistle-stop tour of the main ways that you can as efficiently as possible charge the batteries on your boat. If you want to see that video, maybe hit the subscribe button that's down below, and if you want to give me a thumbs up as well, that's really appreciated. Also down below in the description is that link to a PayPal account where if you want to buy me a beer as a thank you for making this video, you can send me a few pounds, a few dollars, a few yen, whatever it is that you can spare. I really appreciate any support that is sent through to the channel. It's what allows me to continue making these videos, and hopefully when I get enough beer tokens, I may be able to afford a new camera as well. Thanks again for watching. I really do appreciate it. I will see you on the next one. Bye for now. Discharging and recharging. Oh, discharging and recharging a leisure battery that is only discharged to 80% full, so it's still got 80% in it and you've only used 20% regularly, then recharged. One factor in choosing your battery type on your boat may be whether you go offshore racing. One of the requirements for ISHAF